there are players in the market, other traders and merchants within the market who are doing a very good job of decorticating beans for the fish food market. And that's a hugely added value business, which I hope can stay within the UK. And then they're supplying that to Norway or to Scotland for the salmon business. So there's real positivity there.
That was Pulse's trader James Ormerod from Bunge UK. In our interview today, James talks about the market forces affecting the supply and demand of UK pulses. We also discuss the way in which government policy is affecting what people want to grow. I'm Ben Pike. Welcome to Inside the Pod from the Processors and Growers Research Organisation. So welcome to today's episode, and we're joined by James Ormerod from Bunge UK. If you don't recognise that name, that's perhaps not a surprise. It only came into force in August this year. You might be more familiar with the names Glencore and Viterra, which is where Bunge has sprung out of. In terms of scale, Bunge will be the world's third largest trader and mover of agricultural products. So let's have a listen to what James had to say. I started by asking him a bit about his history as a trader.
I've been in the UK business now for 6 years. I was seconded specifically to trade pulses and have done that for the last 6 years. Previous to that, I was also within the business and had a career in the sugar industry. And then I was based over those 20 years, in a combination of London, India and the Netherlands. So been all over the place, but came back here to join the UK business in 2019 really, and have run the Pulses desk since then.
Right, okay. This sounds like a very obvious question, but a lot of farmers who are listening to this, they focus very heavily on producing the best product that they possibly can. They might not consider too much about what goes on beyond the farm gate other than what price they're getting for their product. Could you, in a couple of sentences, explain your role as a trader? What is your job? What are you trying to do with that product that they're producing?
My job is to indicate what I think is the fair value of pulses or beans, specifically beans and peas, to our farm trading team, where they will then pass those prices on to the farmers and hopefully make a purchase. My job, secondly, is to then sell those beans on either to a consumer in the UK or a consumer abroad. A consumer in the UK would be, for example, a chicken manufacturer, ideally, or a fish food manufacturer. And then abroad, for our high quality beans, we would sell them ideally to somewhere like Egypt for the production of falafel. Okay,
so it's obviously a hugely international business, which is dependent on a number of market volatilities, I guess, that can be completely out of our control here, yeah?
We are very dependent on the world price. That's the same for barley, wheat or beans. The bean price is very dependent on the size of the crop, both in the UK, but also in the Baltic regions and in Australia. So those three areas, to a greater or lesser extent, dictate the bean price that we pay the farmer in the UK.
Right. So the UK does have quite a significant impact on the price, would you say?
It does indeed. Regrettably, the bean production has declined in the last couple of years for various factors, which we might touch on in a minute. So probably our influence is less than it might have been. Let's say we go back 2 years previous, every year before then, the UK exportable surplus was one of the largest in the world for fava beans.
Right. Okay. And what sort of numbers are we talking there? What was the surplus?
Well, we sadly, regrettably, have fallen, let's say, from 750 to 800,000 tons of production to probably around like 350 to 400,000 tons this year. So we've halved effectively in 2 to 3 years.
Right.
We were the largest producer let's me be clear, the largest exportable producer in the world, over and above Australia and the Baltic regions, until these last 2 years, where we've just fallen back behind.
Yeah, and I think I know the answer to this question then, but what's caused that?
And it just is simply a decline in area, potentially, well, we think the main culprit is the SFI, where you can plant a legume fallow for X number of pounds, which is a guaranteed return. You haven't got to hope that the crop grows or anything else. It doesn't need to yield. And so that's really, we think, the main culprit for the decline in bean area.
Because there was quite a lot of talk at the time about how the SFI may or may not affect pulse production, and there was a sort of perhaps a mistier-eyed view that perhaps thought that actually growers would stick with pulses, and that they would sort of prefer to grow food rather than put land into environmental schemes in that respect. But we're 2 years down the line now, 2.5 years down the line, and the reality is that that's just not happened. Then they have favoured the SFI over bean production, I guess, predominantly.
Well, in fairness to the farmers, that was probably the right thing to do. The SFI window was quite short. We saw the government abruptly close it this year, which is now sort of past news. You needed to apply for that SFI to get the return on it quite quickly. Ironically, the government, Defra, has just published some numbers for the bean area for the coming for the past 2025 harvest, and the area is actually increased from last year, from 2024. So that's been a big surprise to us, and probably slightly bearish, to be honest. But overall, the trend is in decline, I would say.
And just picking up on that point then, so how much as a trader do you pay attention to those government figures? Because famously, we've reported a number of times on this podcast about how they can be quite unreliable, and when you talk to a number of other people involved in the pulse supply chain, they perhaps don't recognise that number as being accurate. But do you? I guess it's one of the few measures that you have got to go off, is it?
That's really the crux of it. We don't in the pulse trade, and it's a very small group of us, all very good friends largely. There isn't a huge amount of data. If you are a barley or a wheat trader, there's a huge amount of data. There's a huge anecdotal amount of data. Beans are very specific. Beans tend to be grown habitually by certain farmers or certain growers. So yes, I suppose we do cling on to certain amounts of data when it comes from the government, and the government data can be unreliable, but on the whole, it is quite a good benchmark. And certainly, when I've spoken, for example, with Roger or someone like that, Roger Vickers, we'd use that, if not the absolute data, certainly as a guide to the trend and the direction in which we're heading.
What other factors might you bring into your sort of value appraisal then? What other sort of things might affect it? The
biggest problem for bean prices can be competing proteins. If, for example, there is a substantial decline in soybean meal prices or PKE prices or another protein source, let's take PK out of that, but soybean meal, rapeseed meal, other products that a chicken producer or a compound feed manufacturer can use, then that bean price needs to compete on a protein basis. And beans have not done that of late. And so we have less homes in the UK for where these beans can go to. And they are less competitive for that reason.
What are the typical end markets then that you've talked about? Obviously, domestically, we've talked about animal feed in the UK. Exporting markets, you tend to be a bit more human consumption.
There's no difference between the animal feed market in the UK and the animal feed market in Spain or other parts of Europe, in particular the Danish market. Very, very strong compound feed manufacturers. To give you a sort of off-the-cuff statistic, back in 2022, the UK exported 95,000 tonnes of faba beans to the Dutch market alone. That number will most likely be 0 this year. Their compound feed structures work exactly like the UK. Indeed, we have companies here like 4Farmers, for example, which is part of a Dutch and German multinational. So their structure is exactly the same. So when we see a decline in compound feed usage here, it's replicated across the continent, and that's why export demand currently is quite weak.
Right, okay, I see. So how are you viewing pulses at the moment in terms of their value? Have you got your figures today of what how you value?
We write a market report every week, which comes from Bunge, which we distribute to all our farmers, and I think it goes out to some members of the trade as well. And in those, we indicate roughly where we are on price. It depends where your farm is, how far away from a mill or the port you are, but roughly we're talking £205 to £215 ex-farm today for, let's say, October movement for a feed bean price. Yeah.
In your career, how high has it gone to and how low has it got to, the bean price?
Oh gosh, in this, the bean price often needs to be seen in relation to wheat. It has in the past been a discount to wheat, not in my recent career, not in the last 6 years, and then during the invasion of Ukraine, obviously the bean price went bananas like everything else, and I think we traded up to £365 was the highest price we paid for some beans.
Right.
Compared today at 205. But even at 205 ex-farm today, it's still quite an elevated price when you look at the wheat price today, which is approximately, let's say, £170 ex-farm. So when beans become that premium to wheat or other competing products, it can be a hard sell.
Sorry, it's a hard sell.
To persuade a compound feed user to use them.
I see. So that
there's less demand for that product. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
But we have an odd situation this year in the sense that we have a relatively small crop by historical standards, but less demand as well because of the high price of beans relative to everything else.
Right. Yeah. So again, for the farmers listening, I suppose, how confident are you in the industry about sort of, I guess, the qualities of UK production, because it is known as a quality producer, isn't it? UK, would you agree with that? It's sort of known for its quality.
Unfortunately, that's probably. I mean, we make a quality product, but in terms of being able to service the likes of Egypt, that's become harder in recent years. That is something, a developing pattern for the Baltic regions as well. Historically, in a slightly colder climate, you've had less bruchid beetle damage. That's probably something that the Baltic regions are now coming to terms with as well. The French have lived with it for a long time. So I think in terms of quality for edible beans, it's harder for a farmer to manage that today. We compete with Australia, which has no bruchid problem at all. But as a feed bean supplier, yes, we produce large, good quality beans, but don't necessarily always make food standard.
Right. And are you reasonably optimistic about the market overall? And I guess I'm really talking about the production of beans in this country. Or do you have concerns like, I guess, the most of us listening to this today?
Well, obviously, I live in the countryside. Although I'm not a farmer, I do live and breathe farming. Obviously, I can't be political here, but obviously this government has caused some problems. That said, from a purely selfish point of view, we as traders want more green beans to be grown, because more beans grown, more beans cultivated, more beans harvested means more beans to trade, and that's good for us. The disbandment of the SFI scheme, whether it comes back in another guise, is we don't know at the moment. And there's flexibility within the SFI scheme to increase by 50%, and there are various mechanisms by which you can do that, which we don't have time for today. But yes, the disbandment of the SFI scheme would, in theory, hopefully increase the bean area. So in the short term, I'm fairly negative, but in the longer term, I hope that whichever government's in power sees the value in food security. We make a very good faba bean product. It helps our balance of payments because when we produce a lot, we are a major exporter and a major influence on the world market. When we produce a lot, we tend to produce some very good quality beans as well. So one would hope that's going to be seen by the powers that be, but I'm sceptical about that at the moment.
So I agree. We haven't got time to go into all the intricacies of the SFI, but in an ideal world, is there a sort of a mechanism in your head that meets the balance of satisfying the environmental conditions that we need to do in this country and growing enough homegrown protein? Because it's not just about beans; it's about the displacing imported soya, etc. as well. So, is there a mechanism?
That's very topical, in fact, because the imported soya has had another exemption for another year on the EUDR, which is a deforestation program. So that's been exempted for another year.
Just explain what that means for someone who's not familiar with that.
Well, soya meal production, or soya meal production, was going to have a certificate with it that would prove that it hadn't been grown in a deforested area or recently deforested area, and that was going to be an EU mandate, which we were going to copy in some guise, as though we're not in part of the European Union. That's not been enforced for another year, which means some more soybean meal can come in, which means that beans don't necessarily have as big a role as they might immediately potentially have. But I think that's just a delay. I think there is a room for beans in the future for sure.
And so I interrupted you there, but you were going to explain perhaps how we balance the environmental side.
Well, we don't see the problem with beans. We think they're perfect. They do a brilliant job. They're an excellent nitrogen fixer for the soil. A part of a great rotation, you get an excellent first wheat off the back of it. So I personally think, and I don't speak on behalf of Bunge UK here, but I would be encouraging farmers to be growing beans. I think they're a brilliant product, and peas as well. I add the peas to that. We do trade blue peas. We're not so strong on yellow peas, and Marifat's a speciality peas. We're a bulk trader in that sense. But I would, if I was a government, I would probably return to some sort of modest subsidy system, and a slightly increased subsidy for if you were growing pulses. I would be delighted, and I think that certainly makes a lot of sense to me. You're naturally fixing nitrogen. There's no nitrogen leaching into the rivers or anything else, and you're producing a brilliant product that helps your balance of payments. There's no downside as far as I'm concerned.
And I think that sort of leads neatly onto the NCS project, Nitrogen Climate Smart project, which obviously the PGRO has been leading on, and the ambition there is a big one, in that we want to displace a huge amount of imported soya by growing homegrown beans. Now, I think we've established over the course of the work over the last couple of years that from a farmer point of view, that's fine, it can be done. The market has to be there for it, obviously. So the supply chain, I think, is being worked on. I think there's some companies that would very easily and simply switch to UK sourced beans if there were enough available. And I dare say there's others who are probably quite happy with the status quo. But from a trader's point of view, do you see the benefit of us growing? I mean, you kind of answered this question already, but do you see the benefit of us growing more homegrown protein at the cost of soya? And is there any sort of reason from a trader's point of view, or any issues that might raise from your side that you can see in the supply chain?
We would have no problem supply chain where we move vast amounts of wheat or barley. We'd use the same trucks. For us, it's simply logistics would not be a problem of it. It's whether what the compound users will not countenance is they want security of supply, and we'd need to reach a level where we could supply that volume, and we're not there yet. Not by a long way, in fact.
No, it feels like there's a long way to go, but the intention is certainly there.
The NCS project is very interesting. It's government funded. It is interesting. I do go to the talks. I'm not a scientist, and I find it very, very complicated, most of the things they're talking about. But they are interesting and they're very, very well-meaning, and I think there is the opportunity there. But I would think that the government have to almost mandate it or subsidise it or some way be involved for the volume needed to be produced.
Yeah.
To offset the total soya consumption would be nearly 2 million tonnes of beans. Now that's a hugely ambitious target today.
Yeah. And it sort of goes back to your point a moment ago about how there needs to be an incentive there. It doesn't necessarily have to be a financial one, or it probably does have to have some element of financial to it, but the government has it within its power to encourage people to grow more beans or peas.
I mean, the government only recently scrapped the 3-crop rule, so I mean, it has many powers, many levers in its armoury to do whatever it wants to a certain extent. And if there's a subsidy, like we've seen with the SFI, if there's money involved, growers tend to gravitate towards it. They're sensible people.
Yeah. The pea bruchid is obviously something that's on the table in the UK at the moment, having after there was one case discovered recently on a farm in Cambridgeshire. I know you said you're not a huge trader of peas, but you'll be aware of what an issue a pest like that could have in the UK and on the world market. What's your sort of initial reaction to that, and what do you feel that there's or how important is it that we get on top of that issue very quickly?
Well, I have to say, some of my colleagues in the business have. I've been on these conference calls. I listened to them. They've been extremely proactive. I take my hat off to certain members of the trade who, they've been absolutely brilliant. We must heed the warnings. We mustn't plant peas within 12 miles of where that occurrence took place in Cambridgeshire. We've got to be very disciplined. I'm probably a bit sad that there's not more government engagement. If we were in Australia or New Zealand, this would be front page news. But no, the trade has done what it can, and it's got some. It's done well for the limited resources it has. It's done well and acted quite quickly.
How much of an influence does pest damage have on crops from a trader's point of view? How do you kind of evaluate that sort of risk or quality?
Well, we have to look at them in two separate silos, really. I mean, peas are very highly specialised, and we have a very successful canning and production system here in the UK. Beans have lived with bruchid for quite some time now. We're capable of sorting through the good ones from the bad ones, and we'll put the good ones on a boat to Egypt, and we'll keep the bad ones back here for feed. So they're two separate things, but the canning industry and the sort of more downstream part of the pea business here would be hugely affected by this. So I think it's more of a priority for the pea manufacturers, really, that we get on top of this. That would do real damage. I think in terms of bruchid beetle for beans, we've lived in that for quite some time now, and I think we'll continue to do so.
Without wishing to sound too negative, but are there any other sort of major risks that are on your radar for pulse production and the job that you do? You need sustainable pulse production. You need an increase in pulse production, ideally. But is there anything else sort of that you've got your own? We've talked about pests, we know about weather, we've talked about the political environment. Are there any other sort of things that play?
There is this product called Phosphatil Al. It's a pesticide residue, and it has a minimum limit into the European Union. That has caused some problems for our export business. It's not without its issues. We can find enough beans in the country for the export business that are Phosphatil Al free, but it has been a problem. But it's something that the trade are coming together with. They are applying to the HSE here to have the allowance increased, that prove it's non-carcinogenic, etc. And we think once we get that done, we'll be able to trade the European Union to do that. But we are no longer members of the European Union, so we can't persuade from within.
How much of how has the job changed since we left the EU? Has it been a big switch for you, and have you had to do things very differently?
There is this Phosphatil Al, which is a specific problem. But in terms of trading with the EU, I've not noticed any noticeable change. There has changed for things like oats, but not for beans. No, it's been no real noticeable change. The market dynamics in the Netherlands are very similar to the market dynamics in the UK, for example.
Right.
There's currency fluctuations, there's freight issues, freight can go up and down, currencies can get stronger and weaker. But in terms of the day-to-day business of transacting with these counterparties, it's no different.
I see. And I guess just sort of looking at the future, I've got on my notes here, just supply and demand. What are the drivers for the UK policies coming through, and how confident are you, how positive are you about the future for the industry? Have you got any sort of particular thoughts on that?
Well, we have Bunge UK Limited is not that involved in processing beans domestically. We have a small plant where we can tidy beans up for the human consumption market, but there are players in the market, other traders and merchants in the market who are doing a very good job of decorticating beans for the fish food market. And that's a hugely added value business, which I hope can stay within the UK. And then they're supplying that to Norway or to Scotland for the salmon business. So there's real positivity there. The chicken manufacturing business here is no secret of how many chickens and how many eggs we eat as a nation. The numbers are absolutely massive. So we have two particularly good, one particularly good chicken egg manufacturer and a massive chicken manufacturer. Again, they have sort of devoted themselves to having beans in their ration for the time being. So these are core businesses which we don't see declining. So that's very positive.
And on the negatives, what are the worries? What's in your review?
Well, apart from the SFI and the lack of engagement for beans, there's the negative is probably the access to the European market. We need to make sure we get that. Fostilar needs to be solved, and it would be nice to make some better quality or more bruchid resistant beans so that we keep our access to the Egyptian market. And keep the Australians and the Baltics on their toes. But that'll come with time, but it's not here today.
And are you aware of, or is it a similar picture internationally? Are there big advances being made in some of these other major trading units that sort of you're watching there and thinking?
No, but the Australians have been particularly good at protecting their crops from any sort of pest damage. And that's really been that's their huge advantage. They take it very, very seriously.
How do they do that?
They have huge controls on imports of anything.
Right. Oh, yeah. So it's just down to
just down to imports, pure mechanical. Yeah.
Yeah. They're not.
They're hugely disciplined.
Yeah. Something that we could learn a bit about here.
You would think so as an island nation, but we've been part of the European Union for so long, and the whole point of being part of that was frictionless trade. So the checks and balances, if you will, were meant to be limited, and indeed were. So perhaps we are where we are. Yeah. There is a link potentially between climate change and if we get a little bit warmer here, then the bruchid beetle has more chance of establishing itself, essentially. The reason the Baltic has historically not had less bruchid beetle is because it's a colder climate and it can't establish itself with X number of days needed over 20 degrees for the bruchid beetle to establish itself.
So I hope you enjoyed that perspective from James Ormerod, a pulses trader with Bunge UK. Definitely some shared perspectives there from growers and traders alike. And also interesting to hear that some of the concerns we have around growing pulses in the UK are shared by those who are buying and selling it. That's it for today's Inside the Pod. We'll be back again very soon with our next episode, so make sure you hit the subscribe button on your chosen podcast provider to be alerted every time a new episode is released. Until then, thanks very much for listening.